She stood in her own living room with two officers on either side of her, and the first thing she did was look at me. Not at her son. Not at the door. At me. Her jaw went tight the way it always did when she realized she had miscalculated, and for the first time in 6 years, Rowena Ashford had absolutely nothing to say. The officers had already found the rest of it, a velvet pouch tucked inside a decorative tin in the back of her linen closet, containing 4 more pieces that matched the list the insurance company had paid out on 14 months earlier. $47,000 in jewelry that was supposed to be gone, sitting inside my daughter's school bag, and a tin that smelled like cedar and old secrets. I was standing in her doorway. I had driven myself. I had not called my husband first. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. Before I go back to the beginning, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Channel members already heard this story early and uncut, and they're already on the next one. If you want in on that, the join button is right next to the subscribe button, just below this video. Now, let's go back to where this really started, because none of what happened in that living room makes any sense without it. It was a Tuesday in March when my daughter's teacher called me. I was at my desk, second coffee going cold beside my keyboard, and I remember looking at the school's number on my screen and feeling something ordinary, a forgotten permission slip, maybe a scraped knee. The fluorescent light above my desk had been flickering for a week. I had been meaning to report it. I remember noticing it in that exact moment, the way your mind reaches for something small when it senses something large is coming. To understand what happened that Tuesday, you need to know what came before it. And what came before it goes back 6 years, to the day I married Dominic Ashford and became, in his mother's estimation, a problem she had not budgeted for. Dominic is my husband. We have been married for 6 years. He is the only child of Rowena Ashford, who is his biological mother, and therefore my mother-in-law by marriage, with no blood connection to me whatsoever. My daughter, Cleo, is 6 years old. She is my biological child, born from my first marriage to a man named Trevor Osei, who passed away when Cleo was 14 months old. Dominic is not Cleo's biological father, but he has been her legal stepfather since our wedding, and she has called him dad since she was 3 years old and decided the word fit. Cleo has no memory of Trevor. She has only ever known the family we built together, which, for the first 2 years of our marriage, included weekly Sunday dinners at Rowena's house in Glendale. Rowena is 61 years old. She was a bookkeeper for a commercial real estate firm for 22 years before she retired. She is meticulous, organized, and has a memory like a court recorder. She forgets nothing, misquotes no one, and keeps every receipt. I say this not to flatter her, but because it matters. Everything that happened was deliberate. There was no confusion, no accident, no aging memory behind any of it. The dynamic established itself quietly, the way these things always do. Rowena had raised Dominic alone after his father left when Dominic was 9, and she had built around that fact a kind of unspoken mythology. She had sacrificed, she had held it together. She was owed a particular deference that no woman Dominic loved would ever fully provide. When he brought me home the first time, she smiled at me across her dining table and said, very warmly, that she was so glad he had found someone. The warmth was genuine. The assessment underneath it was also genuine. She looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you are not sure will fit the room. I was 31. I was a widowed mother of a 14-month-old. I was finishing a certification in forensic accounting that I had started before Trevor died and refused to abandon after. Rowena knew the certification. She did not know the rest of what I was building, and I had decided, early on, that she did not need to. The mechanism that sustained it was simple. Rowena spoke, and the room organized itself around her words. Dominic loved his mother with the specific loyalty of a man who had watched her hold a household together through real hardship, and I respected that. I never asked him to choose. What I did instead was watch and remember and wait for the moment when watching and remembering would be worth something. The first incident happened 8 months into our marriage at Cleo's second birthday party. Rowena arrived 40 minutes late, placed a gift on the table without a card, and spent the first hour of the party telling my neighbor Fatou Mensa, who is Cleo's godmother and one of my oldest friends, that children who lost a parent early often struggled to attach properly, and that it was important Cleo be watched for signs. Fatou looked at me across the backyard. I smiled and refilled her glass. I did not correct Rowena in front of the guests. That evening, after everyone had gone, I opened a private folder on my laptop and typed the date, the time, and exactly what she had said. I had 11 entries already. That made 12. The second incident was subtler and therefore more instructive. Dominic had been offered a job transfer, a significant one, a promotion that would have moved us to Portland. He was considering it seriously. Rowena called him 3 times in 1 week, and by the 4th call, the conversation had shifted from a discussion to a foregone conclusion. He turned it down. He told me it was his decision. I believed him. I also understood, clearly, that his decisions and his mother's preferences had significant overlap, and that the overlap would need to be accounted for in any plan I made. I did not say this out loud. I signed a lease on a small commercial mailbox the following week. For work correspondence I preferred to keep separate. I was already thinking about what would need to be documented and where. The third incident was the one that clarified everything. Cleo was 4. She had gone to spend a Saturday with Rowena. They had a genuine warmth between them, and I had never once used my daughter as leverage in a dynamic she was too young to understand. I picked Cleo up at 5 o'clock. On the drive home, Cleo told me that Grandma Rowena had a special box with pretty things inside, and that she had let Cleo hold a necklace that was cold and heavy and sparkled. I asked Cleo what the necklace looked like. She described a long chain with a big stone that caught the light. I filed that moment away. I did not ask a follow-up question. I was already 2 steps ahead of where Rowena thought I was. 6 weeks before the Tuesday in March, Rowena had sat across from me at her kitchen table after Sunday dinner and told me, in the gentlest possible tone, that I might want to consider something more steady than the consulting work I was doing. She said the forensic accounting field was competitive. She said she only mentioned it because Cleo deserved stability. I had, by that point, completed contract work for 3 separate law firms and been retained as an expert witness in a civil fraud case that settled for an amount I am not permitted to disclose. I thanked Rowena for her concern and helped clear the dishes. But then Cleo came home from school on a Tuesday in March with a note in her backpack asking me to call immediately, and everything I had been quietly building shifted into place. The call lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I know because I checked my phone log that night, sitting in my car in the school parking lot after I had picked up Cleo and buckled her into her seat and told her she was not in trouble and that everything was fine. For minutes and 30 seconds with her teacher, Miriam Okafor, who had the necklace in a Ziploc bag on her desk and her voice at a register that told me she was trying very hard to stay calm on my behalf. Cleo had brought it in for show and tell. She had told the class her grandmother had given it to her before she went to heaven. Rowena was not dead. Rowena had driven herself to Pilates that morning. I sat in the parking lot for 3 more minutes after I hung up. Cleo was in the backseat asking if we could have pasta for dinner. I told her yes. I watched a sparrow land on the curb and fly away. Then I put the car in reverse and began to think. What I had built over the previous 2 years was not a secret in the dramatic sense. It was simply information I had gathered carefully and shared only with people who had legal and professional reasons to hold it. I had been working quietly as a retained forensic accounting consultant for a firm called Vantage Meridian, a boutique financial investigations practice with 4 attorneys and a client list I was not permitted to discuss. I had been billing through a separate LLC I had registered in my maiden name, Nadia Ferreira, 18 months before Cleo's show and tell Tuesday. The reason it stayed private was specific. I had signed a confidentiality agreement with Vantage Meridian that prohibited disclosure of client work, and I had also made a private calculation that Rowena, who tracked Dominic's financial life with the attentiveness of someone who expected to be consulted on it, would find a way to interfere if she understood the scope of what I was doing. She had already, twice, mentioned to Dominic that my consulting work seemed unstable. I had let her believe it was. The reason it mattered now was this. 14 months before that Tuesday, one of Vantage Meridian's clients had been an insurance company investigating a residential theft claim. The claim had been filed by a woman in Glendale. The insured items included a diamond pendant necklace on a white gold chain, appraised at $22,000, listed as stolen in a home burglary that the police had found no evidence of forced entry to support. The insurance company had paid out the full claim, $47,000, covering the necklace and 3 additional pieces, 6 weeks after the report was filed. I had not worked that specific case, but I had been in the office the week the file was active, and I had seen Rowena's name and address on the intake sheet when it crossed my desk by mistake, addressed to a colleague. I had not said anything then. I had taken a photograph of the sheet with my phone, placed it in an encrypted folder, and waited to understand what I was holding. I understood it now. The first close call had happened 4 months after I took that photograph. Dominic and I had gone to Rowena's house for her birthday dinner, just the 3 of us, Cleo at Fatu's for the night, a small gathering over roast chicken and a Rioja that Rowena had been saving. The dinner was pleasant in the way that dinners with Rowena were pleasant when she was in control of the setting. The table was set precisely, the candles were lit, and she had placed a small framed photograph of Dominic at 7 years old on the credenza because she always did that on her birthday, as though she was commemorating herself as much as celebrating. After dinner, over dessert, Dominic mentioned that I had been busier than usual with work. He said it warmly, with pride. He had always respected the work even when he didn't know its full shape. Rowena set her fork down, very slowly. Busy with what exactly? Her voice had the particular brightness she used when she was asking a question she already believed she knew the answer to. I looked up from my plate. A contract that's running long. Discovery material, mostly. Dry stuff. For which firm? I'm bound by confidentiality on the client, but the firm's based downtown. All of it true. None of it the thing she was actually reaching for. She held her wine glass without drinking from it. I only ask because Dominic mentioned you've been working late. I want to make sure it's worth it. For the family, I mean. Dominic reached over and touched my hand. He thought he was helping. It's worth it, I said, and I smiled at her, and I meant it in a way she was not equipped to interpret. That night, driving home, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table after Dominic went to bed and forwarded 3 encrypted files to my attorney, Celestine Park, with a note that said, "Moving these off my personal server, please hold." Celestine was 44, a former federal prosecutor, and the only person outside of Vantage Meridian who knew the complete picture. She replied at midnight with a single word, "Received." The second close call was sharper. 6 weeks before the show and tell Tuesday, Rowena had come to our house uninvited on a Saturday afternoon while Dominic was running errands. Cleo let her in. She always ran to the door for Rowena, and I had never had a reason to tell her not to. I came downstairs to find them at the kitchen table with a puzzle between them, Rowena's coat still on, her handbag placed on the counter in the exact center of the space the way she always positioned it. We were civil. I made tea. Cleo finished her puzzle and went to watch television in the other room, and Rowena and I sat across from each other with the particular quiet of 2 people who understand each other very well and have agreed, without discussing it, not to say so. She pulled her phone out, put it back, pulled it out again. "I've been meaning to ask you something." She turned the phone face down on the table. "Of course. Dominic mentioned you filed some kind of business registration." Through the county, he thought. I kept my hands around my mug. An LLC, yes. For billing purposes. It simplifies the tax structure on contract work. It's standard for independent consultants. Under what name? My professional name. My maiden name. Clients who knew me before I was married prefer the continuity. Every word of it accurate. She looked at me for a moment. Her jaw went tight, just slightly, the way it did when she realized she was not going to get the full answer through the door she'd chosen. "I suppose that makes sense," she said. "It does," I agreed. She picked up her tea. I picked up mine. Cleo called from the other room asking if Grandma could stay for dinner, and Rowena's expression shifted into something that was almost entirely genuine warmth, because her love for Cleo was, I had long since concluded, The one uncomplicated thing about her. That evening, after Rowena left, I called Celestine. Her voice was dry and efficient when she answered. Tell me something changed. Not yet. But I want to know the exact timeline on the insurance file if I need to move quickly. A pause. The statute of limitations on insurance fraud in this state gives us room. But Nadia, if the physical evidence surfaces, we don't wait. Physical evidence changes everything. I know, I said. I'll call you if it surfaces. I had no idea how it was going to surface. I had no idea it was going to be in a Ziploc bag on a first-grade teacher's desk. The show and tell Tuesday was a Thursday. I want to say that again because it still sounds wrong to me. The Tuesday I had been preparing for, the day I always imagined would come in some form, in some context, at a time of my choosing, arrived on a Thursday, in a phone call I didn't expect, through my 6-year-old daughter, who had no idea what she was carrying. Celestine had told me we were approximately 3 months from the point at which she wanted to move. She had been coordinating with an investigator at Vantage Meridian and had indicated that the insurance company, once briefed, would likely want to pursue recovery and criminal referral simultaneously. The timeline was mine to manage. I had 3 months to let the situation develop in the direction I had been steering it. Cleo changed that timeline in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I did not go home after I picked her up from school. I drove to the school, collected Cleo, spoke with Miriam Okafor in the hallway outside the classroom while Cleo sat inside with a book and the aide who had stayed late. Miriam handed me the Ziploc bag. The necklace was exactly as Cleo had described it 2 years earlier in the car, long chain, large stone, the kind of weight that confirmed its own worth just by holding it. I asked Miriam 2 questions. Had she told anyone else? She had not, except the principal, who had told her to call me first and wait for my direction. I thanked her. I took a photograph of the necklace inside the bag before I touched it. I put on gloves. I had nitrile gloves in my handbag because I was a forensic accountant and old habits, and I held it up to the light. It was real. It was exactly the necklace on the insurance file. I knew it the way you know something you have been looking at for 14 months in a photograph. I put it back in the bag. I thanked Miriam again. I walked back into the classroom, zipped Cleo's backpack, held her hand down the hallway, buckled her into her car seat, and listened to her talk about the pasta she wanted for dinner. I waited until she was settled in front of the television at home before I made the calls. The first call was to Celestine. Her voice, when she answered, told me she could hear something in mine. What happened? The physical evidence surfaced. A silence. Then, where is it now? In a Ziploc bag in my kitchen, with a chain of custody I can document from the moment her teacher put it inside it. The school has security footage of every entrance and exit. Cleo is on that footage, arriving this morning with the necklace already in her bag. Nadia. Her tone shifted to the register she used when she was thinking 3 steps ahead. Do not touch anything else. Do not call your husband yet. Call the police non-emergency line, report it as a found item with potential connection to a prior fraud investigation, and reference the insurance file number I sent you in August. Do you have it? I have it. Then I'll make 2 calls while you make yours. The insurance company's counsel is going to want to know tonight. I hung up. I looked at the hallway, at the light coming under Cleo's door, at the sound of her program through the wall. Then I called the police. I gave them the file number. I gave them Miriam Okafor's name and the school's address. I told them I had the item secured and photographed and that I could provide documentation connecting it to a prior claim. The officer on the line asked me how I had access to the insurance file number. I told him I was a forensic accounting consultant and that I had been aware of the claim for over a year. He asked me to stay available. The second call I made was to the school to confirm that Miriam had not yet erased the morning's security footage and that the principal understood it needed to be preserved. The third call I did not make. I composed it, let it ring twice in my mind, and put the phone face down on the counter. Dominic would need to be told. He was going to be devastated. He was going to defend her first, because he always did, and then the footage would reach him the way all undeniable things eventually do, not through my words, but through evidence that had no interest in his feelings about it. I would tell him. But not yet. At 11:17 that evening, two detectives called me back and asked if they could send a unit to collect the item and take a preliminary statement. I said yes. I unlocked the front door and sat at my kitchen table with the Ziploc bag, my phone, my encrypted folder, and 14 months of documentation that had been waiting, with more patience than I had sometimes managed, for exactly this moment. Rowena called twice while I was waiting for the unit to arrive. I let it go to voicemail both times. Everything I needed to say, I would say once and not to her. The detectives came at 12:41 in the morning. They took the necklace, the Ziploc bag, my photographs, and a printed copy of the insurance file number with Celestine's contact information attached. The lead detective, a woman named Sergeant Briones, who had the affect of someone who had heard every version of every story and was reserving judgment on all of them, told me they would be in touch within 24 hours. She looked at my documentation and then looked at me. Her voice carried the particular flatness of professional neutrality. "You've been holding this for a while." "I've been waiting for the right moment," I said. She nodded once, as if this was an answer she found adequate, and left. I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until 5 in the morning, when Cleo woke up and padded downstairs and asked if we were having eggs. I made eggs. I watched her eat. I thought about the fact that Rowena had placed a piece of stolen jewelry in my daughter's hands and told her it was a gift from a grandmother who loved her. That she had used a 6-year-old's grief and her uncomplicated belief in the people who loved her as a hiding place. I thought about that for a long time, very quietly, while Cleo ate her eggs and told me about a dream she'd had involving a talking horse and a swimming pool. I called Dominic at 6:15, after Cleo was dressed and eating a second piece of toast. I told him I needed to talk to him before he went to work. He came downstairs and I told him, at the kitchen table, what had happened. I told him about the necklace, the teacher, the police, the insurance file, and the 14 months of documentation I had been keeping. I told him in the order it had occurred. I did not editorialize. He was quiet for a long time. Then he opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. "You've known about this for over a year?" I suspected. "I confirmed it last night." "And you didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now." He looked at the table. He looked at Cleo's toast crusts on her plate. His jaw moved the way it did when he was holding something large and trying to find the edges of it. "She's my mother," he said. "I know," I said. "And the police are going to her house today. I wanted you to hear it from me first." He drove to work. He came home at noon. He did not go to his mother's house. I understood that this was his version of choosing, and I did not ask him to explain it. The confrontation, if you can call a planned, documented, legally coordinated event a confrontation, happened 4 days later, on a Saturday, at Dominic's and my house. It was not a dramatic gathering I had staged for effect. It was the outcome of a conversation between Sergeant Briones, Celestine, and the insurance company's attorney, a compact and precise man named Gerald Osei, no relation to my late husband, though I noticed his name on the paperwork and held it for a moment, who had decided that a voluntary interview at a neutral location, with all relevant parties present, was preferable to a formal interrogation at the station before charges were filed. Rowena had been informed she could bring her own attorney. She had declined. Celestine told me afterward that declining legal counsel at a voluntary interview was one of the most reliable signals of a person who still believed they could talk their way out of something. The people present that Saturday morning, Rowena, in the armchair she had always preferred when she visited, the one nearest the window. Dominic, on the sofa, close enough to his mother to be near her and far enough from me to be somewhere in between. Sergeant Briones, seated near the door. Gerald Osei, who had spread 3 folders across our coffee table with the efficiency of someone who billed by the hour and was not interested in prolonging this. Celestine, standing near the bookshelf in a gray blazer, a legal pad held flat against her forearm. And Fatou, who I had asked to come for one reason. She was the only person in the room who had been present at Cleo's second birthday party when Rowena had first spoken about the necklace, and Celestine had advised that a witness to the timeline was worth more than a documentation entry. Fatou stood near the kitchen doorway. She did not speak. She did not need to. Cleo was at Fatu's husband's parents' house, 2 miles away, eating a second breakfast and being given entirely too much screen time by people who loved her. She was not in the building. She did not need to be. The room, before it began, had a surface quality of ordinary Saturday morning. Rowena was dressed well, she always was, and I had come to understand this as armor. She sat with her handbag on her lap, which was unusual. She normally set it on the counter. Her jaw was set. She looked at me once when she arrived and then directed her attention to Sergeant Briones with the particular grace of someone who has decided to treat a serious situation as a misunderstanding and is waiting for everyone else to reach the same conclusion. She said, to no one in particular, "I'm sure we can clear this up quickly. There's clearly been some confusion about where the necklace came from." Gerald Osei opened the first folder. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, without looking up from the folder. "I want to walk through a few items." "I appreciate your time." Rowena nodded once. Gracious. Patient. She turned her wedding ring, a habit she'd had since I'd known her, a thin gold band she wore on her right hand in memory of a husband who had left, and a marriage she had revised in memory into something more dignified, slowly, counterclockwise. The claim filed on March 8, 2 years ago, listed 4 items: a diamond pendant necklace on an 18-inch white gold chain, a pair of sapphire earrings, a gold bracelet with an engraved interior, and a cameo brooch. These items were reported stolen in a residential burglary. The claim was paid in full 6 weeks after filing at a total of $47,000. Is that consistent with your recollection? Yes, Rowena said. My home was broken into. It was a very difficult time. A pause. 2 seconds too long. Sergeant Briones made a note. The responding officers noted no evidence of forced entry, Gerald said. The windows were intact, the doors were locked, and no neighboring properties reported any disturbance. That was in the original report. Were you aware of that finding at the time? Rowena turned the ring. I was told the investigation was inconclusive. That's accurate. Gerald turned a page. The investigation was inconclusive, which is why the claim was paid. Standard practice when there's insufficient evidence to deny. He looked up for the first time. The necklace was recovered 4 days ago from the belongings of a child enrolled at Elmwood Elementary. That child identified you as the person who gave it to her. She said, specifically, that you gave it to her before you went to heaven. Dominic's head came up. He had known this. Hearing it stated in that room, at that table, by a man with 3 folders and no interest in softening it, was different from hearing it from me at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning. Rowena said, with remarkable steadiness, "Children misremember things. Cleo is 6. She must have been confused about where she found it." Her voice stayed level. But something had shifted in her expression, too fast to name, gone before it fully arrived. Celestine turned a page on her legal pad. I looked at Gerald. He reached for the second folder. "Mrs. Ashford, I have here a certified record of the school's security footage from the morning of March 4th, reviewed by Sergeant Briones and preserved by the school administration. The footage shows your granddaughter arriving at school with a bag that was packed the evening prior, in your presence, during a visit you made to her home on the evening of March 3rd. Is that consistent with your recollection?" Rowena's hand stopped mid-gesture. She had been reaching to adjust the strap of her handbag, and she simply stopped. Her hand rested where it was, not quite gripping anything. "I visited that evening, yes. Dominic was working late. Nadia was working. A beat. I helped Cleo pack her bag for the next day. She wanted to bring something for show and tell. I suggested a few things. You suggested the necklace. I don't remember suggesting that specifically. Cleo told her teacher that her grandmother gave it to her before she went to heaven." Sergeant Briones said this without inflection, reading from her notes. Dominic set his hands on his knees. He looked at the carpet. From the kitchen doorway, Fatu straightened, not visibly to Rowena, but I saw it. She set her coffee mug on the counter without sound. "Cleo is a child with a rich imagination," Rowena said. "She says all kinds of things." The color started leaving her face. It went slowly, from the edges in, The way warmth leaves a room when you open a window in winter. I said, very quietly, she said you went to heaven because you told her you were very sick. You told her that in November. She cried about it for 2 weeks. She drew you pictures and asked me if heaven was far away. The room went completely still. Dominic opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. He looked at his mother, and his expression had changed entirely, not to anger, not yet, but to the particular blankness of a person whose framework has just been revised under them without warning. Rowena did not look at him. She looked at me. Her voice came out different, higher, thinned. I never said anything like that. She told me about it the same night, I said. November 14th. I wrote it down. Gerald opened the third folder. The third folder contained 14 pages. I had provided them to Celestine 8 days earlier, and she had provided them to Gerald, and Gerald had organized them in a sequence that I had approved before this meeting. Because Celestine believed in giving a person enough rope in a specific order, and I had learned, by working with her, to trust that instinct. The first page was my documentation log, not the full 14 months, just the entries relevant to the jewelry. 7 entries, beginning with the day I had accidentally seen Rowena's name on the intake sheet at Vantage Meridian's office, through Cleo's description of the necklace in the car 2 years ago, through November 14th and what Cleo had told me, through March 3rd and the bag packing, through the Tuesday that was a Thursday. Gerald placed it on the coffee table and turned it to face Rowena. She looked at it. She looked at the first date, then at the second. Then she looked at me, and for the first time since she had sat down, the composure she had been maintaining, the deliberate, organized, meticulous composure of a woman who had kept receipts for 22 years and believed that was the same as being prepared, had a visible edge to it. Her hand moved to her handbag strap. She held it. You've been building a case against me, she said. The word building came out with something underneath it, not quite accusation, not quite disbelief. I've been documenting what I observed, I said. The same way you would. Dominic said, from somewhere that sounded very far away, Mom. She did not look at him. Rowena's attorney, the one she had declined to bring, would have told her to stop speaking. She did not have an attorney in the room, and she had spent 61 years believing that her own intelligence was protection enough. She said, I kept those items because they were going to go to Cleo someday. They were meant to be hers. The insurance it was an error in judgment. I understand that. But I was preserving them for family. A silence sat in the room like a held breath. Celestine said, from the bookshelf, without looking up from her legal pad, Mrs. Ashford, I'd advise you to stop speaking. She's not your attorney, Rowena said. No, Celestine agreed. I'm hers. She looked up. And what you just said will be included in the statement of this interview. Rowena looked at Sergeant Briones. Something in her expression was reaching for an exit. She laughed once, a short sound, high and entirely without warmth, and said, This is absurd. This is a family matter. Sergeant Briones closed her notepad. The fraudulent insurance claim is not a family matter, Mrs. Ashford. The $47,000 paid out on that claim will need to be recovered in full, and the criminal referral for insurance fraud is already filed. What happens next depends significantly on the conversation we're having today. Dominic put his hand flat on his knee. He was very still. I could hear him breathing. Rowena put her hand flat on the armrest. She pressed it there, fingertips white. Her voice had thinned to something careful and contained. I want to call my attorney. Of course, Sergeant Briones said. We can pause. I advised that at the start, Celestine said, and her tone was not unkind. It was just accurate. The pause lasted 18 minutes. Rowena stepped into the hallway. Dominic did not follow her. He sat on the sofa with his hands on his knees and looked at the 3 folders still open on the coffee table. Fatou came and stood near me. She did not say anything. She put her hand on my shoulder for 3 seconds and then removed it, which was exactly what I needed and exactly what she knew to provide. Gerald was writing. Sergeant Briones was looking at her phone. The room had the quality of a pause between acts, everything that had been said still hanging in the air, everything that was coming already decided. I reached across the table and touched the edge of the third folder. There was one more thing. I had saved it for exactly this moment, not because I was being strategic, though I was, but because I had not been sure, until I saw her face in this room today, that I would need it. If you've been watching this unfold and you're not subscribed, now is the time. What I have coming next makes everything before it look like the opening act. You want to be here for it, and if you want it early and uncut, my members already are. Join button is right next to subscribe, below the video. When Rowena came back from the hallway, she had spoken to her attorney on the phone and she looked different. Not calmer, reorganized. She sat down. Her attorney had told her what Celestine had already known: the documentation log, the security footage, and her own statement about preserving the jewelry for family had collectively established intent, possession, and motive. The question now was degree. She sat with her hands in her lap. The handbag was on the floor. Her attorney, over the phone, had apparently also told her to stop talking. I waited until she was settled. Then I opened the third folder to the final page and turned it to face her on the coffee table. It was a letter. Handwritten, on plain white notepaper, in Rowena's handwriting recognizable to me from the birthday cards she sent Cleo every year, the precise loops on the lowercase letters. The way she pressed the pen slightly too hard and left faint indentations in the paper. The letter was addressed to her sister, Portia, who lived in Tucson and with whom Rowena had a complicated relationship involving an inheritance dispute from their mother's estate that I had heard referenced in fragments over 6 years and never asked about directly. The letter was dated 11 days before the insurance claim was filed. It said, and I am quoting the relevant section from memory because I had read it enough times that it lived in me now, that Rowena had been thinking about the jewelry for a long time, that it had been appraised recently and was worth more than she'd realized, that she needed the money for reasons she did not specify, but that Portia would understand, and that she had found a way to handle it that would not affect Dominic. Celestine had obtained the letter through Portia, who had contacted Vantage Meridian's office 14 months ago after reading about a civil fraud case involving insurance claims and recognizing her sister's situation in the description. Portia had not called Rowena. She had sent the letter to Vantage Meridian and asked, in writing, what she should do with it. Celestine had been holding it since then. We had agreed she would hold it until we needed it. Rowena looked at the letter for a long time. The color did not leave her face this time. It had already left. What happened instead was that the entire structure of her expression changed, slowly, from the composure she had been maintaining to something underneath it that was older and smaller and did not know where to put itself. Her jaw went loose. Her hand, the one she usually used to slowly turn the ring on her right finger, went still in her lap and stayed there. She couldn't speak. I watched her look at the letter and understand, in real time, that the last possible exit had closed. Not because I had taken it from her. Because she had written it down 11 days before she did what she did, in her own hand, with her own pen, and sent it to someone who had eventually decided that honesty was worth more than loyalty. The sound she made was not a word. It was a small, pressureless exhale, the sound of something essential stopping. Dominic, beside her, made a completely different sound. His was involuntary, cut short, a breath pulled in and held. He looked at his mother. She did not look at him. She was looking at her handwriting on the paper, and I think she was understanding for the first time in a long time that being meticulous and being careful were not the same thing. She had kept records her entire life. She had simply not accounted for the possibility that someone else would, too. Sergeant Briones leaned forward. Mrs. Ashford, I want to be very clear about where we are. Rowena's attorney, still on the phone and apparently aware of the pause in the room, said something audible from 3 feet away. Rowena did not lift the phone to her ear. She was still looking at the letter. Gerald Osei closed the folder with a quiet, final sound. Fatu, from the kitchen doorway, looked at me once. I looked back at her. She gave a single, slow nod, the kind that means I see it, I'm here, it's real, and then looked at the window. Dominic finally stood up. He walked to the kitchen, not to leave but because he needed to move, Because the man who had defended his mother at every dinner table and every Sunday and every conversation in which I had held my tongue had just watched her sit in his living room and fold without a single fact left to deny. And he was 39 years old and did not know yet where to put that. I heard him fill a glass of water. I heard him not drink it. Rowena said, very quietly, to no one, I was going to give it to Cleo. Eventually. When she was older. Celestine said, with the patience of someone who had heard this category of statement before, Mrs. Ashford. The letter establishes the intent at the time of the claim. What you intended afterward is not relevant to the charge. She's my granddaughter. Cleo, I said, is my biological daughter and Dominic's stepdaughter. She is not your legal heir and never has been. You are connected to her by marriage only through Dominic, which means the jewelry could not have passed to her from your estate in any legally binding way. It would have been a gift, which you already gave 14 months after collecting $47,000 on it from an insurance company. I said it without cruelty. I said it because it was factually true and because I had noticed, across 6 years, that Rowena's certainties tended to exist in the space between things being said plainly. I was not angry. I was on the other side of angry, in the place that comes after, where everything is just what it is. Rowena sat down without meaning to, or rather she was already sitting, but she seemed to descend further into the chair, as if the chair had finally accepted her weight after years of pretending otherwise. She blinked 3 times fast, the way she did before she cried. Then she stopped. She did not cry. What she did was reach down and pick up her handbag from the floor and place it back on her lap, and I understood this as the last piece of composure she had access to, holding the bag the way you hold anything that still belongs to you. Her attorney spoke from the phone. She listened. She nodded once. She said, I understand. She hung up. Sergeant Briones said, Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to need you to come with me. Rowena Ashford was charged with insurance fraud, a felony, 9 days after the confrontation. The insurance company, through Gerald Osei, reached a recovery agreement under which Rowena surrendered the remaining 3 pieces of jewelry, the sapphire earrings, the gold bracelet with the engraved interior, and the cameo brooch, all recovered from the decorative tin in her linen closet when the officers arrived at her house and agreed to a structured repayment of $31,000, the balance of the $47,000 after the necklace's appraised value was deducted. She pled guilty 8 months later and received a suspended sentence with 3 years of probation and mandatory financial restitution. She did not go to prison. She did not avoid consequences. She sold her house in Glendale to meet the first repayment installment. She moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Burbank, 12 miles east, in a building that did not have the view she was accustomed to or the dining room she had arranged for 20 years. Her sister Portia flew in for the sentencing and sat in the gallery and did not speak to her before or after. As far as I know, they have not spoken since. Rowena is not permitted, by the terms of an agreement Celestine helped me establish through the family court, to be alone with Cleo. She is permitted supervised visits, which have occurred twice in the time since, both at Fatu's house, both with Dominic present. Cleo is 7 now. She asked me once, in the car, whether Grandma Rowena was still sick. I told her that Grandma Rowena had made some mistakes and that she was doing better, and that she was not going to heaven anytime soon. Cleo said okay and went back to looking out the window. She accepted this the way children accept corrections to the stories they've been given completely and without ceremony. Dominic and I are still married. It took us the better part of a year to be fully honest with each other about what the silence on both sides had cost us, and that year was not easy. We had a therapist, a woman named Dr. Ibanez, who had an office in Silver Lake and the practiced calm of someone who had heard worse and was not going to tell us what to feel about it. We went every Thursday for 9 months. We still go once a month. I would not call this a clean resolution. I would call it a real one. Vantage Meridian retained me as a full associate consultant at the start of last year. I bill under my name, my full name, Nadia Ferrer Ashford, because I added Dominic's name when we married and I decided I was not interested in removing it just because his mother had made it complicated. Celestine and I have coffee once a month. She always arrives before me and has already ordered. Cleo started second grade in September. She is reading 2 grade levels ahead. She has a best friend named Rosie and a strong opinion about which color of crayon is the correct green, and she does not remember the necklace or the morning she brought it to school or anything about the show and tell Tuesday that was a Thursday. I do not bring it up. It is mine to carry, not hers. I don't think about Rowena every day anymore. Some mornings I do. Something small will arrive in the quality of a silence or the weight of a Sunday, and I will think about the years I spent measuring my words carefully in her dining room, filing away moments, building something patient and quiet in the space she had decided I didn't occupy. I don't hate her. I genuinely don't. She was a woman who loved her son in a way that had nowhere to go once he chose someone she hadn't accounted for, and she made decisions from that love that were small at first and then were not. I understand the shape of it. I just refuse to live inside it. Cleo asked me last week what I did for work. I told her I helped people find things that were hidden. She thought about this for a moment. Then she said that sounded important. I told her it was. So, where do you think the line was? Did Rowena cross it the day she filed the claim, or the day she put it in a child's school bag? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There's more where this came from, and every one of them is worth your time. My channel members get these stories early and uncut before they go anywhere else. The join button is right next to subscribe below this video. They're already on the next one. I'll see you there.